Wish we had more of them, but you know, in this economy. I'm sure you've all heard the frankly terrifying news about the prospect of Roe v. Wade getting overturned. And at these times, it is more important than ever not only to stand together as a community, but to promote knowledge and education about these difficult topics. So I'm here today to talk to you about the constitutional foundations of Roe versus Wade, the stigma surrounding abortions, and how we can effectively fight for equality going forwards. If you notice the woman in the super cool blue and white striped shirt over there, that's my mom, love her. She currently has the QR codes. So I do have a visual aid prepared for this speech to help you kind of figure out like what all is going on and what I'm talking about. So please feel free to scan that and pull up the presentation on your phones and follow along. I promise it is very aesthetically pleasing. And also, I'm afraid that I will be monologuing about various constitutional amendments and Supreme Court cases for like a hot minute. But I promise that for all of you brave enough to sit through these boring parts of my speech, you will be rewarded not only with the gift of knowledge, but with these starbursts that I have up here. So thank you. So let's get started. When we think of Roe v. Wade, we think about abortions. But a big part of Roe was not about abortion specifically, but about a person's right to privacy with their own body. And that was an issue that had been brought up a long time prior. So we're actually going to start our presentation today with a case called Griswold v. Connecticut, and that happened about a decade before Roe v. Wade. In the 1870s, Connecticut passed a law banning pretty much all contraceptives. And then in 1961, a gynecologist and the director of Connecticut's Planned Parenthood opened a birth control clinic together where they were providing birth control and information about contraceptives to married couples. They were arrested, they went on to challenge this law, and the case made its way to the Supreme Court. Now, the Constitution does not explicitly mention contraceptives, and it doesn't even really mention the right to privacy. Privacy is not necessarily a word that the fathers would have used. But parts of the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment do outline the right to privacy. For example, the government needs a warrant to search your property. It can't take away your right to free speech. It can't make you let soldiers live in your house. And let's also be clear that the Constitution does not grant us these rights. The Constitution doesn't say, for example, we're giving you free speech. It says that it's assumed you already have free speech and the government cannot take it from you. This is further clarified in the 9th Amendment, which says that just because a certain right isn't mentioned in the Constitution doesn't mean that you don't have it. So the Supreme Court looked at all these amendments and they interpreted them to mean that, yeah, the right to privacy is included in the Constitution. So these married couples in Connecticut v. Griswold were making decisions about their own bodies and their own lives, and therefore they have a right to privacy, so they can have like a little birth control as a special treat. And the reason I bring up this case is because that interpretation, that the Constitution does protect a person's right to privacy with their own body, is crucial to the ruling in Roe v. Wade. Yes, I know that we all know the basics of this case, but I'd like to go over some details to make sure that we're just on the same page. So what exactly happened in Roe? Well, Jane Roe's real name was Norma McCorvey. McCorvey became pregnant for the third time in Texas, 1972, when she was 19 years old. She wanted an abortion, but many states, Texas included, did not allow abortions except in cases where the mother's life was at stake, which hers was not. So, she and an attorney with the ACLU filed suit, and the case eventually made its way up to the Supreme Court. McCorvey's argument was that by denying her the choice of whether or not to go through with the pregnancy, Texas had violated her privacy and her liberty. Her attorneys used the 14th Amendment's due process clause in Roe's defense. Now, this clause has a lot of confusing words, but it basically means that the government cannot take away anyone's liberties on a whim, and no state can make a law that infringes upon people's rights. The Supreme Court once again interpreted this to mean that bodily autonomy and privacy are protected in the Constitution. And deciding whether or not to carry a fetus inside of you for 9 months is a big part of privacy with your own body. Excuse me, the wind is bad here. Thus, state abortion laws like the one in Texas would violate people's rights. So, states also, the Supreme Court acknowledged, do have an interest in protecting the potentiality of human life, especially towards the end of a pregnancy. So the Supreme Court ruled that before the first trimester of pregnancy, the right to an abortion is protected. After the first trimester, states can somewhat regulate abortion access, and after viability, or the point where a fetus can survive outside the womb, states can regulate or ban abortions when they aren't necessary to save a person's life. Clearly, this decision has been pretty controversial. majority of the Supreme Court justices are known to be conservatives, we're seeing a resurgence in states passing restrictive and even unconstitutional laws about abortions in an attempt to get Roe v. Wade overturned. In 2018, Mississippi passed a law that banned almost all abortions after 15 weeks. Jackson Women's Health Organization challenged this law, and it was overturned in a lower court. Mississippi appealed, and now we have the Supreme Court case called Dobbs v. Jackson, which threatens to overturn Roe v. Wade. This is the case where the draft opinion was leaked, so just to clarify, the precedent set in Roe still stands as of now. But based on what the leaked opinion said and what we know of our current Supreme Court, it is very likely that when the ruling is actually released, abortions will no longer be protected as a constitutional right across the nation. The gist of the leaked opinion written by Justice Alito is that the Constitution does not mention or protect abortion. Abortion is not really a liberty or something necessary for gender equality, and the concept of stare decisis, basically the court's tradition of sticking to previous rulings, does not apply to Roe v. Wade because he thinks it was a bad and prejudiced ruling, which I'm sure is not ironic at all. But you know what? I'm sure the court has their reasons. I mean, abortion can be a very personal issue, right? And your views on it will be shaped by your own life experiences. Say, for example, if you were part of a church where women are directed and controlled by their husbands. Or, here's an extreme for you. If you have alleged history, of harassing and assaulting women. But I'm sure our Supreme Court justices would never let such biases cloud their constitutional interpretations, right?
So good. Woo! Go!
I want to thank you all for sticking with me this far. I do have a thing of Starbursts up here. I am nervous about this blowing away, but please come up and help yourself if you do want them. I think we hear a lot about how abortion isn't actually protected by the Constitution, or how the Founding Fathers weren't talking about abortions when they wrote of liberty. And sure, abortion access is probably not an issue that was at the forefront of the Founding Fathers' minds. The fact is, there are many pertinent issues today that the Founding Fathers never could have dreamed of. I doubt they know a whole lot about iPhones and data mining, or how to regulate driver's licenses, or how to effectively brush their teeth. Also, their powdered wigs look stupid. And yeah, the Constitution does not mention abortions. The Constitution also does not mention women. So I'd like to propose a deal with the Supreme Court. Either we acknowledge that clearly liberty refers to a lot of different things, and we get all the abortions we need, or we go with that strict interpretation, and we women get to break all the laws we want because clearly they were never meant to apply to us. Otherwise, the Founding Fathers would have written it. The point of the Constitution is not to spell out every human right in exact terms. The point was to set a foundation for a government that will stay strong, capable, and responsive to the people through centuries of unpredictable change. And obviously, the Constitution in its most strict and original intentions would not be that supportive of women or pregnant people having reproductive freedom. The only people allowed to have a say in the Constitution were white landowning men. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they weren't diverse. I mean, there were some Presbyterians in the room. But no women, no people of color. Yes, these men created the foundations for a free and independent country, but they also benefited from systemic injustices that have still not been remedied even today. I mean, really, almost half the delegates at the Constitutional Convention enslaved other human beings. Liberty and justice for all. That is the goal of America. That is the dream. It is not what we had in 1776, and it's not what we have now. It is what we are working towards. It is what all of us are hoping for, fighting for, even just by being here today. And that is what the Constitution supports. Our ability to work towards freedom and equality, no matter the exact interpretations that the Founding Fathers may or may not have had. So clearly, Roe v. Wade and now Dobbs v. Jackson have become symbolic of a much larger movement for equality, especially for gender equality. Yet if the decision in Roe is overturned, this threatens even more than that. Things like racial equality and LGBTQ+ rights have also been at the core of the movement for reproductive justice. Furthermore, if the Supreme Court narrows its interpretation of liberties protected by the Constitution, it is possible that states could pass even more discriminatory laws in the hopes of overturning other cases. For example, Loving v. Virginia ended laws banning interracial marriage. Lawrence v. Texas struck down laws criminalizing intimacy by same-sex couples. Obergefell v. Hodges protected same-sex marriage, and all of these cases were decided under the interpretation that privacy, our right to privacy, is protected in the Constitution. So if the interpretation used in Dobbs v. Jackson shifts to exclude certain types of privacy, all of these monumental decisions that protect equality and autonomy are at risk. Now, I know that sounds really scary and really dangerous, but don't worry, because I actually have some exciting news. According to our wonderful, disproportionately straight, white, cisgender male representatives, homophobia and racism are actually over. Yay, we did it, you guys! Prejudice is no more. I know this might come as a shock to some of you special snowflakes out there who think that you've actually faced prejudice and discrimination your whole life, but I mean, come on, this is North Dakota. If homophobia was real, we'd probably do something crazy, like not include LGBTQ plus people in our North Dakota Human Rights Act that prevents discrimination in employment. If transphobia was actually a thing, we'd have done something like in our state legislative session, we'd have proposed a bill that prohibited transgender children from playing on the sports team of their correct gender identity. If racism was real, we'd probably have done something insane, like made it seem like critical race theory was a huge threat to all of our children and then banned it from being taught in schools. If sexism was real, we'd probably do something crazy like still be taxing tampons in the same category as luxury items when food coloring is exempt, or we would have gone as far as to rescind our ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. Oh wait, the thing is, we know that unfortunately, prejudice is alive and thriving. We've known it our whole lives. And yes, things are much better than they used to be, and yes, the idea of banning same-sex marriage or interracial marriage is an extreme, but it's not impossible. When we speak about our experiences with prejudice, we are so often shut down. We're being too sensitive, we're misinterpreting things, we really should be lucky we have rights at all. And when we express concern for our future like we're doing now, we are dismissed, we are taught to doubt our own realities. I remember during Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings, a lot of women were voicing their fears about Roe v. Wade being overturned. I remember bringing that up in a class discussion, and the response I got was, well, I wouldn't worry about it. They can't actually change anything that'll affect us. We know how to recognize these trends, this prejudice, because we've been affected by it our whole lives. Our loved ones, our communities have been suffering, and we are not overreacting. We are not making things up when we say it needs to end now. We know what is at risk. We have a right to our voices, our decisions, our bodies. We have a right to our anger. Now, as we turn that anger into action, we need to make sure it's directed at the right people. It makes sense that we are angry and disillusioned with our Supreme Court justices. But activism aimed at them will most likely not be effective because the Supreme Court is supposed to be insulated from the people and from the other branches of government. It seems insane that few people who are not accountable to us can hold so much power, but there is a reason for that. They are not supposed to represent us, they are supposed to represent the Constitution. So in the case that a majority of Americans might believe in something unconstitutional or harmful to a minority group, the Supreme Court should have the necessary insulation to protect constitutional rights for all. Clearly, that's not what's happening now. In the case of Dobbs v. Jackson, they are blatantly disregarding our constitutional rights. But while the structure of the Supreme Court is not at all perfect, I think there are many other problems that may be more to blame for our current situation. For example, 1/3 of our Supreme Court justices were nominated by a president who lost the popular vote. How can we trust the president to nominate individuals that will uphold democracy and liberty when the majority of us didn't even select him in the first place?
Woo!
And our senators, the people we have elected to represent us, confirmed these nominations. They assured us that these justices will be able to put aside their personal biases, that their histories of misconduct and prejudice are completely irrelevant. And the people who do have the power to legislate, who do have the power to make laws based on what the majority of Americans want, have done next to nothing. The Democratic Party has had control of Congress for years, and whether it's a series of political setbacks or a simple lack of effort, our rights to decide our own reproductive futures, our rights to our own bodies, are still not protected under federal law. These are the people we need to hold accountable. These are the people we will hold accountable.
Woo!
But of course, we need to acknowledge their side as well, right? we don't want to be too judgmental. It's easy to view the people behind these laws that dictate what we can and can't do with our own bodies as controlling or misogynistic, but please, our representatives just want to save the babies. In fact, I can think of a bunch of examples, and I mean things that really happened, that prove how supportive of life our public officials are. So to be fair to them, I'd like to share a couple of these examples with you today. But we're gonna make it fun. Are we a chanting crowd? Can we do a chant?
Yeah!
So we're gonna do a little call and response. I'm gonna say, hey representatives, to get their attention, let them know they're in our thoughts and prayers. And I'm gonna ask you to respond by asking, how pro-life are you? So let's practice that real quick. I say, hey representatives, you say, how pro-life are you? Hey representatives!
How pro-life are you?
That was perfect, you guys. And I'm going to share an example with you that proves that abortion bans are really just about protecting innocent life. Are we ready?
Yeah!
Hey representatives!
How pro-life are you?
So pro-life that a Texas lawmaker introduced a bill in 2021 that would allow the death penalty for a person receiving an abortion. Because all life is sacred except the life of a woman making her own decision. Hey representatives!
How pro-life are you?
So pro-life that last year, the North Dakota legislature passed a bill to stop NDSU from giving grant money to Planned Parenthood to provide sex education throughout the state. Because you know what stops abortions? Less knowledge about reproductive systems. Hey representatives!
How pro-life are you?
So pro-life that the governor of Alabama signed a bill into law 2 months ago that makes it a felony for parents and doctors to provide transgender children with safe, gender-affirming care. Because our children need to be protected, you guys, unless they're part of the LGBTQ plus community. Hey representatives!
How pro-life are you?
So pro-life that last month, 192 House Republicans voted against a bill that would provide financial aid to address the nation's baby formula shortage. You have to have the baby. They didn't say you had to feed it. Hey representatives!
How pro-life are you?
So pro-life that last week, 2 House Democrats and 202 House Republicans voted against a bill that would ban the sale of semiotic weapons to people under 21 and the sale of large capacity magazines. So, just to recap, children are too young to know that they're trans. They're too young to learn about racism. They're too young to learn about reproductive organs, but children are old enough to practice active shooter drills in schools. They're old enough to live in dread about whether or not they'll grow up with human rights, whether or not they will have autonomy over their own bodies. Hey representatives!
How pro-life are you?
Not pro-life at all.
Yeah!
I understand that this is an emotional issue with many different and valid perspectives. Some people see abortions as the simple termination of a clump of cells. Some people see abortions as tragic and horrible. That all makes sense. But at the end of the day, these widespread efforts to persecute access to abortions are never about saving babies. They're not about protecting innocent life. Women of color and people in poverty especially will be endangered by these bills, and our representatives don't care. Because these laws are about controlling us. They're about stigmatizing and shaming the bodies and lives of pretty much anyone who is not a cisgender man. There are so many ways in which our bodies are politicized, controlled. As a woman, as a teenage girl, I don't know any interests we're allowed to have that aren't mocked. In schools, dress codes tell us to cover our shoulders and midriffs because they're distracting to other students. Shame tells us not to openly carry tampons to the bathroom, to apologize if a pad accidentally falls out of our bag. Relatives and even strangers tell us that, sure, we say we don't want kids now, but we'll change our minds someday. We're too obsessed with our looks, or we've let ourselves go. We're too passive and shy, or too bossy and arrogant. We should smile more. Our rights are getting taken away, but we should smile more. This is not about protecting life. It is about telling us that our bodies don't belong to us. No, I don't want to dampen the mood too much. So, as we discuss the true motivations of our representatives, I thought we'd play a little game called Pawnee or ND. Has anyone here heard of the TV show Parks and Rec?
Woo!
For those of you unfamiliar, it is a sitcom taking place in Pawnee, Indiana that parodies a local government. In this game, I'm going to share with you a quote, and you have to decide if it is a line from Parks and Rec or if it was said by one of our lovely, lovely North Dakota legislators. Again, this is a real government from public record versus a TV show parody of government, so it should be pretty easy to decide, right? All right, so once again, I'm going to say a quote, and I want you to shout Pawnee or ND, whichever you think it is. Here's the first one. Are we ready?
Woo!
Let's go.
It is inevitable that a thousand babies shall, not may but shall, be murdered via abortion every year in this state. Some will be sucked up a vacuum tube. Pawnee or ND?
ND!
That was a North Dakota legislator. All right, next one. And this is not discrimination. This is not transphobia, whatever that is. What's that from, Pawnee or ND?
ND!
ND. Can we have one conversation about feminism where men get to be in charge?
Pawnee!
That one was Pawnee. We may have our flaws here in North Dakota, but I believe that none of our legislators would ever say a thing like that. I mean, they don't have to. Men are already in charge.
Burn.
Next quote, everyone. I have a little Nigerian friend, which is strange enough. Pawnee or ND?
Pawnee! Pawnee!
Wrong, that was North Dakota. That was a legislator who said that during an actual testimony. I think we should be careful when we speculate what the founders intended when they wrote the charter. Pawnee or ND?
Pawnee! Pawnee!
That was Pawnee. We'd never be that reasonable here. And also, I just want to clarify that if you're having trouble hearing me, absolutely come up and scan one of the QR codes and follow along in this segment on the presentation. I do have the words typed out as well. All right, next quote. I'll close this testimony with the words of a song, A Few Good Men by the Gaithers. Pawnee or ND?
Pawnee!
ND.
Oh my God.
I guess my thoughts on abortion are, let's all just have a good time. Pawnee or ND?
ND?
That one, thankfully, was Pawnee. There are no consequences to my actions anymore. I'm like a white male U.S. Senator.
Pawnee!
Pawnee. And here's a doozy, you guys. And in that process, my wife's water broke and we left a snail trail 2 miles back to the house. Who said that? Someone from a TV show or someone in our actual real-life government?
Oh my God. ND!
It was ND. It was actually in the same testimony as the quote about the Nigerian friend. So everyone remember to vote. The lack of women in this government is criminal.
Not ND.
That one is Pawnee. We never acknowledged that here. A former speaker mentioned separation between church and state, but that's not in any of our founding documents.
ND!
That is ND. I got 2 more for you. Number 1, 15 years after we took prayer, and by the way, we do pray here, and the 10 Commandments out of public school, pregnancy rates of girls from 10 to 14 rose over 400%. Who said that, Pawnee or ND?
ND!
That was ND. And I do want to clarify, by all accounts, there is not a correlation between school-sponsored prayer, which is unconstitutional, and teenage pregnancy. And furthermore, just about all reputable sources will tell you that teen pregnancy is on the decline. And our last quote in this game for you today, I fully believe that a woman should be in charge of what happens to her body. Pawnee or ND?
Pawnee.
It was Pawnee. What a radical notion. Thank gosh that's just from a TV show. Isn't that bleak? We are not overreacting, y'all. I don't think it would be possible for us to be overreacting right now. Our fears and our anger, they are justified. That being said, anger is not all we are. When I look at everyone here today, everyone who has come out to celebrate the strength, the resilience of our communities, I see power, I see confidence, I see solidarity, compassion, warmth. Yes, this is a terrifying time, but it is not hopeless. Y'all, we're at Pride. We have countless educators, organizers, activists here today who are passionate about making a difference. We have countless booths set up to help connect you to petitions, volunteer opportunities, organizations that can help our communities. In particular, if you want to help in the fight for reproductive justice, stop by the North Dakota Women's Network booth. You can also follow us on social media to learn more about the future rallies and protests we have planned. Planned Parenthood is here today. They can give you great information about what they're doing to encourage sex ed and safe access to abortions. If you can, please donate to the Women in Need Abortion Fund and the Red River Women's Clinic. They are wonderful about helping people in our communities get safe and accessible abortion care. Things may seem overwhelming. but there are countless people in our community who are putting in the time and the effort to advance equality every day. Every single person here today knows what it's like to face prejudice and the ignorance of the world, and every single person here today knows that the pain of that is not what defines us. We know how to speak up, even when our voices tremble, even when we're told we're too loud, even when it seems like no one is listening. We know the importance of community, the importance of compassion, the importance of believing, despite all the bigotry in the world, that our future is bright and loving and kind. Our bodies belong to us. Our decisions belong to us. We have the right as Americans, as humans on this earth, to control our own futures. And we will not back down until everyone recognizes that right. We will not back down until everyone has control over their own bodies. We will not back down until reproductive justice is a reality for all. We will not back down. Thank you. Once again, please stop by those booths if you have any questions. I'm happy to talk to them. And if you want to see my references, I have a couple printouts. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Happy Pride!